So welcome, Perennial Pride listeners. Thanks for joining me as well. So today I got a special guest. I'm really was excited to have this discussion with a friend of mine, Barron Damon, who's got 20 plus years in the nonprofit space, philanthropic space. And, I think when we think about wealth building and use of our wealth, I think this is a topic that just doesn't get enough attention. And it doesn't get, we talk about investments, about reducing taxes, all these things that sort of drive a lot of discussion, but rarely do we ever talk about how we use our wealth and for good, right? It's just something that I don't think gets enough attention. So I wanted to bring Barron on here to share his expertise around it. He's obviously done a lot of great work on it, and he's helping support others in his philanthropic coaching, as well as helping advisors really have those good discussions with their clients. So Barron, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Tom. I appreciate you having me. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, and this is where, it's been a topic in even in my own family, thinking about how to think about giving in the proper way, right? And we often don't get taught, just like finances, we don't have to get
Yeah.
taught like how to think about giving, right? We might give maybe some money to a local charity or a cause we care about, but we really haven't really structured it in any thoughtful way, I don't think, for a lot of people. So, but before we get too deep in there, my curiosity first for you, you've been in this space for what, 20 plus years.
Yeah.
How did you get into it from your lens and it's kind of stayed with you for this long? Like, how did you start?
Yeah, I really started, first I will say I had no desires to be in the space, right?
Mm,
So it wasn't one of those things where, as a young person, we have these kind of dreams and goals and things we want to do or these majors that we want to have in college. I thought about perhaps being a psychologist,
mm,
or a psychiatrist because people always came to me with their problems. So I think, that would have been good. But I also was very interested and curious with business. I'm a third generational kind of business owner, so that was always a lens that I looked through as well. But this didn't come on until later on, and it wasn't until I went to college and actually got mugged in college. And as a result of that mugging, it just changed my life completely.
mm.
Right? I mean, I really spiraled kind of out of control, and I won't go into all the details and what that entail, but it really was a defining moment for me, right? And I think up until that point, which is probably even more relevant, Tom, is I was pretty, I was younger, but I was also kind of selfish, right? I was like my sister said to me one time. She said, "You act like people owe you something." It was four children. I was the only son. I was accomplished athlete, academic scholarship, and everything came pretty easy. And it wasn't until I had that hardship in my life I really began to understand how important it was to have empathy for others. And it was that transition to a nonprofit called Big Brothers Big Sisters where that really started taking root for me. And so after the mugging, things got really bad. I kind of turned my life around, and I don't know. For me, I became a Christian, and it was the best thing for me because I began to understand where I was as a person, you know? And once I figured some things out, I was like, man, I need to do better in life.
Mm.
I need to help people. I need to be more concerned about other people. And that's really where the journey began. And so philanthropy, I tell people all the time, they say, well, what is philanthropy? Is really the love of mankind. And I really had to develop that love of mankind and that love for people.
That's great. Wow. And it's always, it doesn't surprise me anymore because there's, more and more I have these sort of conversations, like the events in our lives impact us so greatly.
Yeah,
And a lot of times just allow us to sort of look inside a little bit more.
yeah,
Everything's so external.
right,
Like you
right.
see things and all the social media, all the things that draw our attention to the outside and what we're
Yeah,
supposed to be or strive for. And it takes some maturity and sometimes unfortunate events to have us look inside a bit,
exactly,
you know?
exactly.
So no, that's interesting. So, I mean, you're coaching people, you're helping others. think about philanthropy maybe a little differently and guide them. Like, generally, what do you see when you meet with folks, right? What are you experiencing when you see, how are they thinking about it? Like, broadly speaking, like just
Yeah.
more curiosity.
Yeah, broadly speaking, people don't have a lot of information or they have misinformation.
Mm.
And it's based on what people see, right? In terms of the media. So people have a misconception that philanthropy is about wealth, right? And being able to have enough money to give to charities. People say to me, Tom, all the time, "Oh, I'm going to do that one day."
Someday.
That's
Yeah.
that's hashtag goals, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When I have more money, right? And those are the things that I hear quite often, or I don't know enough about it, right? And people start undervaluing themselves, right? And how they can contribute to the world in a very unique way based on who they are as an individual.
So a lot of it sounds like, if I take what you're saying, and I think there's some elements of this too, in just general financial planning or personal
Yeah.
finances, there isn't really any thoughtful plan to it.
Yeah.
And potentially, if there is some activity, it's probably just more reactive, one-off things here and there,
Yeah.
right? Or you're putting it off,
Yeah.
right, for some day till for something happens that triggers you to now make it important enough, right? Or you have enough money to do it, right?
Right.
So a lot of things get, like I see this estate planning. The vast majority of people know I run across don't have an estate plan. Everyone
Yeah.
knows they're going to leave this earth,
Yeah.
but for some reason they don't do it, right?
Right.
Very reactive.
Right, right. And I say even when we think about, my concept is called the business of giving, right? But when you think about when you start your business, and Tom, are you an independent business owner? You are. So when you start your business, there were some things that you just prepared for, right? I mean, you were learning along the way, but you researched and you talked to other people and you gathered all this information and you made a determination, you know what? I'm going to start my business. And there was some systems and some processes in place. There were some resources that you assessed that you needed. And all of those things, philanthropy is the same way. And that's why we call it the business of giving, because just like you would think about starting not just a business, but anything that's important,
Right.
right? And that has value, you're going to take some time to learn it, get some advice, or get someone to help you, or whatever it is. And it's the same concept.
So one of the things that I know I think this is where we're aligned quite a bit is that, the money and wealth, right? It's important, right? There are resources that the more now as I've grown, it wasn't about greed. It was like, okay, now I have more wealth. I can do things to impact things, right?
Yeah.
My family, others, right? A little more freedom. But that's kind of more of the downstream, but more of the upstream important things around the values, things that are connected to you that are important and that drive all these sorts of things. And how does that relate to your philanthropic giving, right? And approach? Like, can you talk more about that and what you see when you're dealing with clients like this? Like, where does
Yeah.
that fit?
So what happens, when people have a desire to give, right? And most people do. They have a desire to give. So if they have that desire, those are the values, right? Those are the things that's really important to them that matter. But part of the challenge that people have is, what is that philanthropic why, right?
Mm.
What is that thing that they, wake up in the morning thinking about, or going to bed thinking about a problem they can help solve, right? And most people, even though they have values because they got those values from their family,
Yeah.
growing up, but they don't necessarily have a why, especially if you had some resources growing up, right? I wasn't rich by no means, a middle class family, but I just had everything, And so if you would have asked me what was my philanthropic why 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I couldn't tell you, because I didn't really care about anything but me,
Right. Right.
right? And so once you have those values, now you start looking to say, how much resources do I have that I can apply to those values, right? That could be $500. That could be 10,000 or 500,000 or a million, right? And it doesn't matter the amount, but it does matter the strategy that you employ, right? And most people may have the values, they may have the money, the resources, but they don't have the strategy. And if you don't have the strategy, it's still not going to work, right?
Yeah.
The way that you want it.
Yeah.
To your point earlier about being reactive, right? It becomes more reactive. There's some people, we used to host so many different events over the years when I worked for a national nonprofit. And what would happen is we would have these galas and people would come and they said, well, somebody just invited me, and so they end up giving money that night. They have no association with that organization whatsoever. But the reaction part is somebody asked me, right? I was helping a friend out,
Right.
right? And that's great. As me being part of that organization, I'm glad, right? But I would rather have a conversation with you, develop a relationship with you. So maybe working with kids or helping kids is a philanthropic why, and we can develop this long-term relationship, right? Over time. And then so when I think about values plus resources plus strategy, then it equals impact, right? And that's where we're trying to get to when we work with clients. We want to get to the impact, and we use that kind of formula to help them get there.
Yeah, that's great. And to your point, and the values part is interesting because I do think, to your point, you experience it, you see it, whether it's good or bad, right? You see these things come up in behavior by how things, but I don't often think that it gets talked about as not enough
Yeah.
amongst families, right? Around what it means to be a Damon,
Yeah.
right? Right, that kind of thing. Like, and I think about it even for my own family, and it's so key because it anchors you
Yeah.
as to kind of what we're supposed to represent, like caring for others, whatever it is in your family. And it just sort of goes downstream to your point, the end result of where your money gets deployed. Well, it has to lead back to something, right?
Yeah.
Meaning, or it kind of just can dissipate.
My family, years ago, we created a mission statement for the family.
Mm.
And it sits right in on our kitchen, on the counter. And we have guests over all the time. And one of the things people always do is like, oh, a mission statement. We never had a mission statement for our family, right? And they find it intriguing. And there's been people over the years that has asked me, can you help me develop a mission statement for my family, right? And part of that mission statement for us is philanthropy. It is giving. Mm-hmm. And so my son recently gave away a scholarship to a young man who was helping kids in the community play lacrosse, and so he gave him a $250 scholarship. And I put it on social media online, and someone said, man, I love to see your son giving to the community like that. I'm going to match it.
Wow.
Right? And so he was taught that at a very early age because it was part of the mission and the values that you're talking about, right? And so those values have to be transferred down to the other family members.
That's great. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I mean, it's some people might just catch it by accident and take it, but you're making it just a fundamental part of the existence, right? That it just almost becomes just natural. It's just normal. It's like breathing.
Yeah,
to some degree.
exactly. And that's why when you begin to study wealthy families and when they have generational wealth over generations, and you know this, Tom, it usually only lasts 3 generations,
Right.
But when you start getting to 5, 6, 7, like Rockefeller, type generations, that means those values have been passed down.
Right.
Pretty significantly, right?
Right.
And they're not going to let it go.
Right.
And this is just really interesting when it can be that. But you don't have to have Rockefeller money to do that.
Right.
I wrote a book a couple of years ago, and I call it the Legacy Book, and I put my family members' names on it as authors because I want them to always have that book, even when they have children. We could be long gone. They say, oh, your grandfather wrote this book, and it's a family book, right? And you can look in it and learn about our family as a result of what he wrote.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
So, and I think some of these kind of conversations, I think, prop up a little bit more, especially when people go through, like we talked about earlier, like events in their lives, like maybe a death of somebody or some, it doesn't always have to be a traumatic experience as bad as that, but, something that triggers them transition in life, right? They're switching from selling their business, let's say,
Yeah.
right? And they might be exploring these sort of things like, what would be like a good question they should be asking themselves as they're reflecting on this sort of broader topic?
In terms of the client thinking about,
Yeah, just like because people in that reactive mode, now I have to say,
yeah,
how do I get more proactive with it? And so my instinct says, okay, well, you might be thinking about it, or marriage buried in there, your values are what they are, right?
yeah,
How do I even kickstart the thinking around it individually, right?
yeah,
What should I be asking myself to really get at the heart of this? And there might be tons, but I'm just thinking like, what would you
yeah.
ask them initially?
Yeah, I would. So we have a whole process, that we use, and we really do try to get to what people care about. And sometimes people don't know what they care about, and that's perfectly fine because we can discover that. Like you were saying, if there's some major life event happens, people kind of discover that, right? Accidentally, over a decade ago, my wife had cancer,
Mm,
and we end up partnering with a company called Survivor Friendly that help with durable medical equipment and breast cancer survivors, right? That would have never happened if we
right,
wouldn't experience that, right?
right.
But the question is, what we have a value card that we use, and there could be, it's probably 60, 70 different value words that they can identify. And once we start putting those value words together, we start connecting those value words to what is something that you may be passionate about, that maybe you didn't even realize you were passionate
Hmm.
about, right?
Hmm.
Passion to me, I heard Robert Kiyosaki say in Rich Dad Poor Dad, passion is something that you love and you hate at the same time, right? That's an interesting dichotomy, right? Because it's something that I really,
Hmm.
it just bothers me. And then there's something, but I still love it. For me, when I worked at Big Brothers Big Sisters, I was passionate about helping kids, be exposed to so many different things because I knew if they were exposed to it, they had an opportunity. But I hated when kids didn't have the opportunity. They weren't exposed to anything. When you hear a young person never left their county, they had never been on the interstate before. And that just saddened me, right?
Yeah.
Because I hated that because I know they won't have the experience that they needed because they didn't have the exposure that they needed.
Yeah. I like that approach. And
Yeah.
it kind of reminds me of something else. And it's kind of to your point, it's one of those love hate, maybe, or two
Yeah.
sides of the coin where it's, if you take a look at your days or weeks and things that sort of just draw your attention, which ones are giving you a boost of energy or the ones
Yeah.
are draining the heck out of it? And they
Right.
may sit close to each other
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you love it. And then to your point, you see the other negative sides of it where, maybe a lot of people don't have access to it or don't, never see it, like you said. And
Yeah.
so it's like one of those things that, it's just somewhat paying attention and just stopping for a moment to reflect on it. I think it was helpful. So, listen, now, in the world of wealth, right? And I think we're going to talk a little bit about this. Like, there's going to be a massive wealth transfer. There's a lot of
Yeah.
folks that have built great wealth and thinking about next generation. And so, obviously, they may be dealing with advisors, right, to help them manage their money and all this and this stuff. And so, you build a training to help advisors sort of have these good conversations to help their clients think about it. And what prompted you to kind of go down this path?
Yeah, that's a great question because there's a couple of things. One was I know quite a few advisors, and we were struggling to figure out how we could integrate our services together.
Mm,
I mean, I've literally had advisors call me, reach out to me from even LinkedIn and say, Barron, I'm a financial advisor. I don't know anything about philanthropy. Maybe we can work together. but it never materialized for whatever reason, right? Because when you start dealing with individual clients, there's a lot of different dynamics that go into that. And one, I recognized that. And I said, it would be great if I can provide information to advisors without the fear or the thought that maybe Barron's going to steal my client from me, or maybe Barron's going to try to give away millions of dollars and my assets under management were going to go down.
Right.
Right? So those are some of the kind of external things. But one day I was talking to a friend of mine who was an advisor some years ago, and I asked him, I said, why did you stop being an advisor? And he said, my clients wanted me to hold their hand too much. He said, I wanted it to be transactional. And I was like, wow, that's very interesting. Good guy, one of my best friends. And I started thinking about that. How many other advisors felt that way? And that doesn't mean you're a bad person, right? That's just maybe you've been taught that, or maybe that's the best approach that you know about, right? One of the matter of fact, the first lesson in our course is how we go from transactional to transformational, right? And just thinking about it differently, and how do we integrate philanthropy into our practices that could really deepen the relationships that we have with our clients.
So what are those, thinking about that, just touch on maybe a couple things, like what are some key shifts that, would have to help train people to think differently about it, right? To move it from transactional.
Think about it. I was thinking about, I was at the gym earlier today and I thought about this example, and I guess I'll just kind of give it to you to see if it lands, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, you watch movies before, you may have had this experience in your own life when you see someone talking to someone through a door, right? The door's closed and they're trying to have a conversation with them and they're like, just open the door so I can talk to you.
Yeah.
There's usually like a groom before the wedding, a bride or something like that, right? And you hear these conversations and you're like, just open the door so you can talk, right?
This is a parent teenager thing.
Parent teenager, very similar to that. Philanthropy is like that door opener, right? It allows you to open that door to have the conversation you really need to have, right? And once you have that conversation, it begins to deepen that relationship, and some of those hidden assets that maybe you don't know about, you may now start having access to them, right? Because they trust you in a different way that perhaps they didn't trust you before, because it was kind of transactional in nature.
Yeah. And I would imagine too, and which I do believe is an issue like in the financial services industry broadly, not everywhere, but everything's very siloed in nature.
Yeah.
And there's typically not a great coordination across all the different investments, taxes, philanthropy. It's all kind of independent. And you may be dealing with a bunch of different advisors who only have those specialties, so they're not even equipped to really help, right? And so, I can imagine that's also a kind of challenge to overcome.
Yeah. That's why we talk about a good bit in the course how important it is to pull these resources. We know them to be like a family office style, right? That's, even a growing trend in advisory. But that's really good because you have one location where you can have access to multiple specialties. Mm-hmm. For me, being a philanthropic advisor, a lot of times, advisors may not know a lot about philanthropy, and they can reach out to me and say, hey, man, can you work with a client? And we share with them. They don't have to be an expert, but we do want them to be comfortable and confident sharing what they know, right? Just like if they need an estate planner, they're not going to try to, let me share some stuff about estate planning. You don't know anything about it. And the same thing with philanthropy, right? You have to be able to pull those resources from people and share how important it is to have a team working with you. But if it becomes competitive, it's like a competition between, it doesn't work, right? No. It has to be, you have to look at it like the best way for us to help this client is for us to provide the best resources we can for them.
Yeah, and I look at it, that's certainly incumbent upon advisors of different types, right,
Yeah.
to change that mindset,
Right.
but also encouraging clients say you got to demand that from your advisors
Yeah.
that they talk to each other, right?
Yeah.
Because you got to be looking after me and my family, right?
Right.
And I remember that as a client kind of thinking that way, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I got to manage all these different advisors and pull together their expertise, and I got to pull it in together and figure out what to make of it, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
making it hard for
Yeah.
people. So,
Absolutely. And we encourage that advisor to be that quarterback, right? And to bring the people together because it strengthens your position as an advisor within that family,
right.
right? And that's what you want. And that's what this whole philanthropy piece is about. If we can get people just to think differently about it, not just an extra thing to do, but the research says over the life of a advisor, once they start implementing philanthropy, I mean, their assets under management increase by 10 times or more, over the lifetime. So it makes sense for, people to do that.
So let me touch a little bit also, I know we touched on this topic a little bit earlier about this wealth transfer and such. And I look at this and I think you might align to this sort of thinking around it. It's a lot of the attention is how can I get the most money over, maybe if you have an estate tax problem, you're trying to mitigate that. Like it's
Yeah.
very numbers oriented
Right.
for the most part. And, part of me says, certainly if I've gotten older, is that the values and things that I want to impart to my children and others are way more important. Yes, I want them to have good use of the wealth and steward it properly, right? I don't want them to just go spend it on, frivolous things
Right.
at meeting, but, want to pass values on, right? And philosophies, things that are, hopefully going to impact things for generations. And so talk to me a little bit more about that, because that's probably part of the, I guess, training that helps people sort of see the bigger picture of it.
Yeah. And there is it's in module number 3 when we really talk about the wealth transference, right? And what's going to transpire for advisors and how you can get in on top of it, right? And part of that, for example, is, ask the parents, can you meet with those heirs as well? If they haven't been a part of any conversations, hey, can I take them out for a cup of coffee? Especially if they're that millennial kind of Gen Z age, right? Where you can start developing a relationship with them, early on. That really helps because you want to know what their values are too. And once you figure that out and you have the conversation with the parents and you kind of understand what their values are, because a lot of times they may not be in lock sync with each other, right? We were talking, my wife, she works for a technology company and everything is all AI, right? And my son, who is a Gen Z, hates AI, right? And it's just interesting. And it's like that in terms of values too, right? When we start talking about millennials and Gen Z, we're talking about ESG too, right? Environmental sustainability and governance. That's very important to them. But Generation X and boomers, that wasn't a big deal, sustainability, right? But if it's not a big deal to the boomer and the millennials, like, this is how we're going to invest our money. And that parent's not my money, And so we have an impasse here. But that advisor, we teach that advisor how to have those conversations, how to ask the right questions, how to mitigate, interference and problems and all of that. So that training really covers all of those different aspects that help them not only deepen the relationship, but how to navigate certain situations that will come up as it relates to this transference of wealth.
Yeah, I would imagine it's what's all that, obviously discussions happen, which again, me without somebody to help facilitate it may never happen.
Yeah.
But doing it in a proper way, I would imagine can bring families together in a very
Yeah.
positive manner. I could imagine that, right? Because you're talking about things that you care about, things that to your point, make you angry. Like
Yeah.
this injustice in this world, it's our part that we can help support, right?
Right.
Whatever
Right.
that is. I mean,
Right.
that to me is a exciting thing to be able to do together, certainly as a family.
And there's a lot of barriers, Tom. Let's be realistic, right? There's some, there's in terms of hierarchy, if those families, like, this is my money, I earned it, right? I'll do what I want with it. They try to make the heirs kind of jump through some hoops, for it, and, all of those kind of things. And we even talk about that in the course. And how do you navigate those kind of things? So it's a lot of different dynamics, but to your point, if we could get people on the same page, and it takes some work to do that, and asking the right questions and solidifying those family values, because what happens is, even if you have different values, right, you're going to probably have, let's say, for example, 5 values, you're going to probably align on maybe 2 or 3 of them, right? That's all you need.
Right.
Because what happens is now, as that advisor says, hey, you know what? We're going to take a part of the money and we're going to make sure ESG is great. And then the other part, we're going to make sure, the boomers or whoever, the X's, they're good with it. So you almost like have 2 pots of money, and you're both kind of, each one is kind of managing that part of it. Right. And that's a strategy that we talk about in the course. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because when we're talking about this, and if as I'm listening to you, and I recall conversations I'm having with different people in different walks of life, whether it be clients, friends, family, whatever, and people have spaces where I don't even know what my money, my parents have in terms of wealth.
Right.
And they're towards the end of their lives. Like, biology is going to happen. Like, unfortunately, this is what life is.
Yeah.
And that conversation, no conversations have been had, no sort of visibility in what it is. So then it's like, it just seems odd to me. But that is probably, in my mind, I've heard more the norm than the exception.
Yeah.
And, this is what hopefully the training and these sorts of sort of strategies and approaches can help bridge that. Because, I think that I could see where the bond, like I said, around the family could be really enforced. And then the money can be used in a way that is aligned to what the family would want, not just what the father or mother or kid wanted, right? There's some alignment that can be had that hopefully smooth things over.
I mean, that's so powerful when a family can be on one accord, because money breaks people up, right?
Yep.
There's brothers and sisters don't talk for 25 years, right? One was left out of the wheel, one didn't get the amount that they thought they should have, and all these different things that can happen. But that advisor can play a very important role in deterring some of that. And if they get to the point, through this training, and they feel comfortable. I was talking to one of my Rotarian colleagues the other day. I'm in the Rotary Club, and she said, "Barron, I got some questions for you about philanthropy." And I said, "Okay, shoot." And she was saying that she's had an advisor for a number of years. She was a lot more proactive than the advisor. I said, "So did he start the conversation, or she start the conversation with you?" He said, "No, we started the conversation." And so one of the things that we talk about in the training is people don't know when to start the conversation. Is it the first time I meet with my client, or is it the 5th time? Or I wait for them, like in that particular case, they waited for them to have the conversation. They felt more comfortable. And really, research says that we should be having conversations with them within the first 5 meetings. Usually that first meeting is even, okay if you feel comfortable and confident.
Listen, I think these are all, again, certain topics are just uncomfortable for some people, a lot of different ones. And again, at least you facilitate it and give people tools and a good way to think about it, right? From both sides, whether it's a client advisor or a client, right? And
Yeah.
hopefully you bridge the gap and hopefully help people get to a much better space than kind of ignoring it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a long game, Tom. This is not, I start doing this immediately and mine is going to go up,
Yeah,
skyrocket, right?
yeah,
This
yeah,
is not that. It's a incremental growth process over time, and hopefully, you'll keep that client for a long time, and those heirs, you will have them as well, right?
yeah.
They say that 90% of the heirs will not use the same advisor as they had, right? That their parents had. And I'm like, wow, that's a pretty high number. Of course, that could be different based on what research that you look at, but we know it's high, right? And the reason it's high is because you have a younger advisor who is talking to that millennial and say, hey, I got these robo services. You don't have to, I got the great platform. I have all these new things and gadgets that I know you like. Just go with me, right? And the other advisor like, hey, let's have a meeting and, kind of traditional approaches. And sometimes, obviously, they don't work. And we talk about that in the course, how to, we give people scripts and frameworks for them to use, even how to set up the meeting, right? In the time frame of meetings, so they can, feel comfortable doing that.
Wonderful. Well, Barron, this has really been a pleasure to chat with you and learn more about these things. I mean, I think to your point, I speak for myself. I think there's more I would personally want to do in the philanthropic space. And sometimes, to your point, don't know how to do it,
Yeah.
right? And no direction to go. And for those who are, it's certainly advisors that be able to take the training, but, we're from folks who maybe are interested in getting help with how to think about their philanthropic sort of piece of their financial lives. Like, how would it be best for it to maybe reach out to you or resources that you might be able to share?
Yeah, and I'll say one other thing about the course is it's also broken down in modules too. So if you don't want to do the whole course, you could maybe the transference of wealth module is something that you're really interested in, and you can take that module. What people can, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn, Barron Damon, and also the Business of Life, cc.com is our website. And it really kind of lays out, what we do and how we do it. And we would love to just have a conversation with you. Those conversations are free. We also work with individuals, but also corporations. Okay. So there's some companies who, are interested in our services. I have a potential client that I'm working with is a large bank, and they hired a person to be their philanthropic person, but they don't have any experience in it. And they said to me, Barron, I had no idea that it was this much. I was just thinking, hey, yeah, we're just going to give money away. Not quite, right?
Neither bear or bad news.
Yeah, it's very comprehensive, but it's a good comprehensive because you're learning, because a lot of these companies, we want to help them create corporate social responsibility programs. And that's what, to tie it back into millennials and Gen Zs, they want to work at companies who are corporately responsible,
right,
to their communities.
So it's attractive that way. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate all you do, and thanks for sharing all your wisdom, experience, and definitely folks who are interested in learning more, definitely reach out to Barron, wealth of knowledge and expertise. So thanks again, Barron.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you having me, man.
Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride Podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together really to help you get more educated around your finances so that you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. And if you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a aggregation of a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to not only build my wealth in my accounts, but build wealth in my life. and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next episode.